the African race, the original man and woman of the earth, and the founders of civilization. I pledge to continue the struggle, which will help to bring my beloved brothers and sisters to total freedom. I pledge to study and discipline myself mentally, physically, and spiritually, so that I may grow into a soldier for justice, because my people need strong and intelligent warriors. I pledge to live my life standing tall, for a person on his or her knees is not respected. And if I am challenged, we must say that we will not surrender our position nor our dignity, but instead we shall endure until the final victory is won. Ashe. You can take your seats. I must turn it up. All right, I'd like to bring up on the stage one of our hardworking brothers in Soul Survivors Nation. Please help me in welcoming Brother L.A.
Thank you, thank you. How everybody feeling? Hot? All right, that's what I like to hear. I'd like to first of all say thank you to everybody that came out. Like he said, we know it's a little warm in here, but bear with us. You know, we trying to control the climate as much as we can. We all African people, so we draw off a lot of heat. So that's something you're gonna have to get used to. I love y'all. Love you too, man. All right, I wanted to do a quick intro. Brother Tony Bowder, many of y'all already know who he is. You know, he's a brilliant brother in our community. He's written various books. One that I read was the Bowder Files. The first one, I haven't read the second one yet, but I plan on doing that. I think Egypt on the Potomac contributes to Nile Valley civilizations. You know, this brother, he's written about many issues that we should know about, you know, that our people should learn about. And even after this lecture is done, you know, I challenge everybody in here to come to the store and buy a DVD, because for real, this room should be packed. You know, we was giving away free tickets. You know, I was one of the brothers that was answering the phone, writing down people's names, you know, trying to get people in here so when you come through the door, you get your ticket. Like I said, this room should be packed. And because it's not, it's our duty to pass on the information to those who couldn't make it here tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to bring up a strong brother in our community, Brother Tony Bowder. Clap your hands.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it. Otep, how you all doing? Fine? Excellent, excellent. What are we talking about today? What do you all want me to talk about today? What's on my mind? I got a whole lot of things. If you want to hear what's on my mind, we'll be here for, a couple of months at least. But share what I can. All right, well, let me start off by sharing a brief story that will set the tone for tonight's presentation. I think it was about 1991, February, during Black History Month. I was invited to do a presentation in D.C. by a black organization. And it wasn't until I got to the facility to begin my presentation that I found out it was a division of the CIA, you know. And 'cause we got brothers and sisters working in the CIA, working everywhere. But they brought me in for Black History Month to do a keynote. And of course, understanding where I was very conscious about what I did, whose hand I shook. And I said, well, no, thank you. I don't need anything to eat or drink. I'm fine. But whenever I go to give a presentation, I'm always very conscious of how I'm introduced. See, because I speak in a lot of different venues, and the introduction tells me something about my audience, and I tailor my presentation based on my introduction. So since I found out I'm speaking at the CIA, I'm real curious as to how they're going to introduce me. So the director of the agency came to introduce me, and he was a little short, Peter Lorre looking white guy. And he was late. Program had already started. They had choir singing. He came in just before I was about to go on stage, and he was to introduce me. So he came on stage, he came in the room, saw everybody snap to attention, had a few words with the sister who was emceeing the program, and then he jumped on stage and proceeded to recite my bio. All right, so he's reciting the bio verbatim, the bio that I sent them. And then after about a minute, I'm realizing he's not reading from anything. It's committed to memory. And so the bio is very specific. It ends with Tony Bowder is devoted to researching the history and culture of African people, something to that effect. And he recited everything verbatim except to that last line. When he got to that last line, he said to the audience that Tony is in the same business that we're in. The only difference is he gathers information crucial to the survival of people of African American ancestry. Ladies and gentlemen, Tony Bowder. So I came up, did my presentation, and then I thought about that introduction later on. Here I am at the CIA. This guy, the director of this agency, said that I'm in the same business that they're in. What is their business? Any intelligence gathering agency exists to gather intelligence, information. They have their agents in the field gathering intelligence. They send that information, that intelligence, back to a centralized facility, which then analyzes that information and does a synopsis of that information and then presents it to those people with the need to know, who will then determine how that information is going to be used in order to ensure the survival of that country, of that organization, or of that individual. And I said, well, this guy was right on point. That is what I do. I gather information about us. I research our story. I analyze that information, and then I share it with those with the need to know, you all. So that by sharing my intelligence, my information with you, you all can know what I know. And then the key is for you to use this information to ensure your survival. All right? That's what it's all about. And to be perfectly honest with you, we've been in survival mode here in America for 500 years. So it's time to move beyond survival into thriving. Thriving. So the information that I'm going to share with you this evening is designed to help us thrive as a people. You all are familiar with WOL, station which had its beginnings in Washington, D.C., and the slogan for WOL is information is power. Well, let me just modify that slogan, because it was fine in the 80s when Dick Gregory first popularized it with Cathy Hughes, but we need to modify that. Information is just information. Knowledge is power. Knowledge is the analysis and the strategic implementation of information, which leads to power. So we're going to talk about some knowledge that you all will hopefully begin to apply in your life so that you can empower yourself. If you're not going to do that, you're really wasting your time. We don't have time to waste. We don't have time to play. We need to be about the business of learning as much as we can about everything that we can, and then apply that knowledge in our lives to ensure that we will thrive, our children, our children's children's children will thrive. And if we aren't willing to do that, we're wasting air. Because if Baltimore is anything like Washington, D.C., where I've been living for the last 37 years, black folk are in deep trouble. Deep trouble. White folk are coming back in the hood. They're building condominiums. And now folk who have lived there all of their lives can no longer afford to pay the property taxes. So where is your grandmother going to go? Where are you going to go? Where will your children go? So if we aren't thinking 40, 50 years down the road, then we might as well give it up. Because the folk that we're dealing with are long-range planners. They're not any smarter than us. They just created the game that we have been trying to play for too long. And every time we catch up, learn the rules of the game, they introduce new rules. It's just like, the Masters golf tournament, I can't even speak, tournament is going on now. And I remember when Tiger Woods won the Masters the first time. He won the Masters, and he won it by the largest point spread of anybody in the history of the Masters. And the white announcer of the program said that Tiger Woods will be the yardstick against which we will measure our inferiority. That's what the white guy said. This was 10 years ago when he first came on the scene. And so they decided the next year, in order to prevent Tiger from winning again, that they needed to redesign the course. And I was listening on the radio yesterday. They were talking about the Masters, and they added an additional 150 yards in order to make the course Tiger-proof. So when we master the game, they change the rules in order to stay ahead of the curve. But guess what? We keep winning. We keep winning because that is who we are, whether we know it or not. So tonight, I want to talk about some issues that are crucial to our thriving as a people. We need to move beyond survival mode and move into thriving mode. And I want to center my remarks around the February 2008 issue of National Geographic. I don't know how many of you all saw that issue, but it was an issue that was devoted to the kings of Cush, the black kings of Egypt. So I want to talk about that, and as I always do with my information, I want to analyze that article, talk about what's wrong with it, and then begin to look at other information that was not discussed in that article that is crucial to us today as a people. So I want to deal with a challenge to that story. And in setting the stage for that, I want to just briefly, play a audio clip from the radio of an interview with the white guy, Robert Draper, who wrote that article. His comments are interesting, as you all will hear for yourselves. And then I want to build my analysis of this article based on what he said and the information that was in that article, and then advance it to some things that are relative to us today. Is that all right? Okay, so let's, everything should work okay. Let me just make sure we got everything going.
Now to a largely untold chapter of African history when Nubian kings conquered Egypt. The so-called Black Pharaohs ruled for nearly a half-century. They played a major role in unifying the country and created glorious monuments which still stand today. Their story appears in this month's issue of National Geographic magazine. Robert Draper is the author of the article, and he joins me now. Robert, welcome.
Thanks for having me on.
Your most recent book, let's talk about this first, because it's curious to me. It's about George W. Bush. So how did you become involved in research about black pharaohs?
Well, it is an interesting juxtaposition, isn't it? But in fact, one of the black pharaohs, arguably the mightiest of them, Taharqa, has a certain amount in common with our president in that they both have had a healthy estimation of their abilities, perhaps were possessed by hubris, no shortage of self-confidence in any event. But I do dare say that I'm probably the only individual who has gone from interviewing a sitting president in the Oval Office to 72 hours later standing on the banks of the Nile and admiring the pyramid in which Taharqa is encased.
It was a fascinating article, and the pictures were just as fascinating. One of the pharaohs that you feature is, I believe I'm pronouncing this correctly, Pa. And Pa's rule over Egypt. Talk about the significance of that particular pharaoh.
Well, PA was significant because he did indeed conquer Egypt, perhaps at the behest, it's still rather unclear, of elements within Egypt who believed that Egypt had been floundering for the previous 3 centuries, had lost a lot of its spiritual and cultural traditions of the New Kingdom era, and was riven by tribal warfare and corruption and economic decline. And so PA, in the meantime, as a southern neighbor to Egypt and what we now know as Sudan, was preserving a lot of these pharaonic traditions, and perhaps, though we're not certain, at the invitation of Karnak priests, he believed that the way to save Egypt, in essence, was to invade it. And invade it he did, overthrowing the warlords, but though there was a certain amount of bloodshed, showing no particular interest as a conqueror. Instead, made a kind of truce with the warlords, returned some of the governance to them, and then retreated back to present-day Sudan. But that essentially inaugurated what we now know as the 25th dynasty of Egyptian rule, which was a roughly 90-year period from 770 BC to about 656 BC, during which Egypt was ruled by what we now know as Sudan.
One of the interesting things about the article is the fact that this information has not been passed along from generation to generation. I want to read a passage from the book to you and ask you to talk about it. It makes reference to the fact that there were more pyramids in Sudan than in Egypt. And here's what it says. The first time, and we're talking now about Charles Bonnet, an archaeologist, a Swiss archaeologist, who wrote in 1964, or who said in 1964 these words: "The first time I came to Sudan," recalls Swiss archaeologist Charles Bonnet, "people said, 'You're mad. There's no history there. It's all in Egypt.'" And it seems that at some point, attitudes perhaps changed, but maybe not enough as they should have. What did change in terms of the recognition and the acknowledgement of these, and of the study of these black pharaohs?
Sure. Well, to back into that, the acceleration of European colonialism of Africa in the 19th century led to the discovery of these great Nubian pyramids that you're referring to, but the prevailing mindset of the times was such that these great structures, it was believed, could only have been built by Egyptians or other Caucasians, and it's almost embarrassing. It is rather embarrassing, frankly, to read the turn-of-the-century texts in which these Nubian contributions were scoffed at as the work of primitives, or explained away by saying, well, they must have been led by Caucasians, by Egyptians or something. This only began to change around the time of the man you referred to, Bonnet, in the early 1960s, and Bonnet and the American Timothy Kendall and others like them, they were schooled in a more enlightened atmosphere of the civil rights era, and they began to travel to present-day Sudan with a less jaundiced eye. And what they began to discover was, in fact, that this was a sophisticated culture that not only was, in fact, run from sort of deep in Africa, but indeed was in a lot of ways autonomous from Egypt, with its own construction and burial customs. So this wasn't just the work of a bunch of cunning mimics, but for a very, very remarkable civilization in its own right.
Here's my next question. How much of this evidence, the writings, pyramids, other ancient civilization structures, let's put it that way, how much of that remains today?
Well, a fair amount, but not as much as one would like. Of course, this is, the corollary, I suppose, to the victor goes the spoils, that to the subjugated go ruins. And the Nubians, since they were in power for only about a century and were much despised by the Assyrians and others, had many of their likenesses defaced and, in fact, obliterated. For example, the PA, whom you mentioned, the great pharaonic ruler of the Black Pharaoh, we don't even know what he looks like. We only know that his skin color was black, and so to some degree we are reliant on the conquerors of the Nubians to describe Nubian contributions, which of course is a very, very tenuous way to view Nubian history.
Would that explain why some of the pharaohs, the images of the pharaohs in the article, they look as much Eurocentric as Afrocentric?
Well, to some degree, yeah. There's again a lot of sort of flip-flopping that you see among archaeologists and among these renderings, and there's a lot of blurred lines too. There's a line that I mentioned in the story that's drawn a fair amount of interest, and that says that the ancient world was devoid of racism, which is not to suggest that there wasn't subjugation or enslavement or discrimination on the basis of class or culture, but pigment itself was not the marker in the ancient world that it would later become, and African women who were married by Egyptian royalty didn't just become concubines; they were oftentimes queens, and we see likenesses of these queens. The children of these of conquered Nubians were often schooled by the finest Egyptian tutors, and so there are all these blurred distinctions. You see in Egypt dark-skinned warriors and light-skinned warriors side by side, and it's very telling, I think, that race isn't so much of a marker, but viewed through 19th and 20th century eyes, I think that became a point of confusion.
Your suggestion, and we have about 30 seconds, your suggestion in the article was that the emphasis on skin color actually came out of Europe later
That's
on.
Correct. Yes, that's exactly right, and an archaeologist in later years would be very much influenced by the thinking of that time, but that was not the way it was back then. Egyptians looked down on Nubians, but they looked down on everybody. They looked down on Libyans and Asians. They believed themselves to be superior, but that was much more of a civilization thing than a skin color thing.
Robert Draper, thank you so much. Robert Draper is a contributing writer for National Geographic magazine. He wrote this month's cover story, Black Pharaohs. You can see pictures of the Nubian kings at our website, nprnewsandnotes.org. Robert, once again, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on.
Now, I was on my way to do a lecture at our Culture Center in D.C. last month when I heard this on the radio. So, of course, I was hot. For those of you who don't know, I've been to Egypt a few times. Last summer, I made my 40th trip to Egypt. So this is something that I've devoted over 25 years of my life to. I know our history and our culture, and so I felt compelled to write a response to this National Geographic article. But after I heard this interview, I sent a letter to the gentleman who did the interview and sent him a copy of my article and told him that I wished he had read my article prior to interviewing this guy, because it would have been a totally different interview. But most of our people in the media don't know our history. So they can't have an intelligent interview or discussion with other people who tell our story. But the important thing to understand is Kemet, which is the original name for the country that the Greeks called Egypt. Kemet was an indigenous African civilization that was founded by Africans from the south. So the Nubians are the descendants of the original creators of Kemetic culture and civilization. The only difference between the Nubians and the Kemites is location. They're the same people. Black folk in Baltimore are no different than black folk in New York, D.C., Richmond, Atlanta. We're all the same folk. It's others who want to pretend as though Egyptians are a totally different race of people than their ancestors. The people of Kemet were very clear who their ancestors were. So I'm going to build on that and discuss that, but I want us to be clear about that issue before we move forward. Also, I want to take a moment as well to acknowledge two brothers who are now ancestors, two brothers who were crucial to my development as a man, Asa Hilliard and Uncle Ra, who both passed last year within 40 days of each other. Unc passed in July the 1st, after a very serious and sudden bout with cancer, and Asa died in Egypt at the ASCAT conference on August 13th. So these are two brothers who I miss dearly, and who, even though they're not here with us physically, they are ancestors, and I call on them every day to help me do this work that I have chosen to dedicate the rest of my life to. So every presentation I do this year is devoted to these two brothers. Let's talk about Kemet for a second. Most people know Kemet because of these structures here, pyramids. Giza is the most researched site on the planet. More archaeological research has been done here at Giza than anywhere else on earth. More books have been written about these pyramids at Giza than any other structures on Earth. So we are beginning to get a more deeper and profound understanding of these structures. What is clear is that this pyramid, which is the pyramid of Khufu, which is the largest pyramid in the world, what is clear is that this pyramid was never a tomb. It was used for other purposes. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but let me just share with you some of the latest research about these three pyramids at the Giza Plateau and Khufu's pyramid in particular. Here is a diagram that shows you the interior passageways within Khufu's pyramid. You'll notice there's a room that's called the Queen's Chamber, and there's a room called the King's Chamber. Those words have no real significance because a king nor a queen was buried there. Europeans gave these rooms these names. But you'll also note that there's a grand gallery, there are air shafts, which direct out to the north and southern side of this pyramid. So this building was not used as a tomb. Let's be clear about this. This is the only pyramid that has rooms in the upper level of the building. All of the other pyramids have subterranean tombs. So this structure was not built to house a physical body. But more specifically, I want you to notice these shafts that go to the left and the right. Research has been done within the last several decades on these shafts, and what has been discovered is that these shafts are oriented to star systems in the north and star systems in the south. And based upon a reanalysis of the oldest books ever written by human beings, the so-called Book of the Dead, which the people of Kemet referred to as Peret Em Heru, or the books for coming forth into day. They were essentially cliff notes for the soul of the deceased, so that they could be reborn again in heaven. They were instructions on how to be born again. Let's be very clear about that. And this process of being born again was written in the pyramid text, was also written in the coffin text thousands of years ago, and there are hundreds and hundreds of documents which all say the same thing. And that is, when you died, your soul would make its journey into the southern sky and be reborn in heaven. Now, this is the constellation of Orion. There are 3 stars in the belt of the constellation of Orion. A European engineer advanced this research about a decade or so ago to show that the 3 pyramids at the Giza Plateau, the 3 pyramids that I showed you all here, let me go back. 3 pyramids that I showed you all here are an identical replica of the 3 stars in the belt of Orion. And that this particular star was where the soul of the deceased goes when it dies. This star, the air shaft in the Queen's Chamber, points to this star, which is known by its Greek name Sirius. But the Kemetic name for this star was Sepethet. This star was referred to in Kemet as the doorway to heaven. The doorway to heaven. Or as Asa stated in his last lecture in Egypt, this is the Stargate, if you will. So our ancestors, 6,000 years ago, identified the region in the heavens where the souls of every person would be reborn. And they left specific instruction on how that soul is to make that journey. Now, here's a diagram that shows you the relationship of the constellation of Orion, which is devoted to a star. So this is the star that the shaft from the King's Chamber points to. This is where the soul of the deceased goes. And then this is the guide for that star, Sepethet, which is devoted to a Set. We know Sepethet by his Greek name Sirius. The Dogon in Mali also know this star. They call it Sigitolo. There's 2 stars, Potolo and Sigitolo. Those 2 stars relate to a Set and her son, Asar. So our ancestors in Kemet had a profound understanding of astronomy. had a profound understanding of the heavens and how the heavens manifest themselves on earth. As a matter of fact, the three pyramids at Giza are a replica on earth of the 3 stars in the Orion's belt, and off from the stars in the Orion belt in Sirius, or Sepedit, is the Milky Way. So what you see they did was recreate on earth the same celestial objects that existed in the heavens. So here are the 3 stars of Orion's belt, and here's the Milky Way on earth. So not only did they create this site at Giza, but what engineers and architects are now beginning to examine is that all of the pyramids between Giza and Saqqara were part of a master plan that replicated the heavens. So we are now beginning to do a serious reevaluation of the people of ancient Kemet. So I want you all to be conscious of this, to remember this, because I want to use this as a stepping stone when I talk about the Kushite kings and why they conquered Kemet and what they did when they conquered Kemet, all right? This is back at the very beginning of the development of Kemet. This is what the indigenous African people did when they established this great culture and civilization, and it guided them for the next 2,800 years. They had a profound understanding of the heavens, and they had a specific relationship with the sun, which is the oldest symbol that represented God, the creator of all life. They identified 3 specific aspects of the sun as it moved across the sky from east to west. When the sun rose in the morning every east, it was called Khepre. Khepre is a Kemetic word which means rebirth or renewal. So the sun, this symbol of the creator, was reborn every morning in the east. When the sun reached its highest point at noon, its highest point in the sky, it was called Re. And we still call the sun Re today, or at least the light that comes from the sun, a ray of light. And then when the sun set in the west, it was called Amen. Jews, Christians, and Muslims all use that word Amen. Amen in the Kemetic language means hidden or concealed. And what it represents is the unseen presence of the Creator once it sets on the horizon on the western hemisphere, the west part of the horizon. So this is just one aspect of how they related to the heavens in order to identify how they should live their lives on earth. So these were a spiritual people that had a profound understanding of what was above and how it affected everything that was below. And then they built temples. Temples were houses where the soul or the spirits of the Neteru, or the many different aspects of the Creator, dwelled on earth. They built temples which were repositories for the Spirit of God, if you will. Dozens of temples built all along the Nile. Each temple was devoted to a specific aspect of the Creator, a Neter, or God, if you will. Every temple had a specific format. Here's the model, the front part of a temple. You had 2 pylons which represented the horizon, the eastern horizon and the western horizon, the place where the sun rose and set. The space in the middle represented today, the present moment. That was the doorway which led into the temple or the house of God. These temples were sacred space. Sacred space. Inside of these temples, the priests and priestesses performed ceremonies at least 3 times a day to maintain their relationship with the Creator. This is the first system of theology known to mankind, conceived and practiced for thousands of years by Africans before there was any religion on earth. So we need to be very clear about who our ancestors were, what they did, and how others benefited from that ancestral knowledge. They incorporated this knowledge in their lives and practiced it from the womb to the tomb, because it is through the practice and application of this knowledge that you were able to ensure that when you died, your soul would be reborn in heavens. So they're very clear. We need to understand that for ourselves. This is a reconstruction of Apet Sut, known today as the Temple of Karnak. This is the largest temple ever built on the planet. This temple is so large, you can take every church in London, England, put them inside of this temple and still have room for 2 football fields. This temple is so large that at its height, at the height of its development and power, over 83,000 people live within this city. Maintain the temples, maintain the altar, grew the food for the libations that were placed every morning before God, had the animals that were used for sacrifices, did everything to maintain this temple. And there were dozens of temples that were built to this same format, not the same scale, but to the same format, following the same basic procedure. This is who we were when we were in charge of our destiny. And we were the most prominent people on the planet. And to be honest with you, Kemet is still the most significant civilization that ever existed on the earth. People are still marveling about the accomplishments that were created in Kemet. What's significant about the Nubian kings, Pianke, Shabaka, and Taharka, is that before they went on their journey to conquer Kemet, specifically in the north where the Europeans were, whenever they began their journey of conquest, they stopped here and prayed, because this is the temple that was devoted to the Neter Amen, or Aman. And so they knew, the Cushites knew, based upon their history, that Amun, the Neter Amun, was born in Cush, in Nubia. But his largest temple was in Kemet. So there was a kinship between these two lands. So before Pianke, Shabaka, and Taharka set out to conquer the Europeans who had occupied the northern regions of Kemet, they stopped here and they prayed and they bathed themselves in the sacred waters, purified themselves to go into battle, because they were engaging in a holy war to restore the land of their ancestors. Taharka built 10 columns right here. Taharka was responsible for building and remodifying this sacred lake right here. So these Africans were continuing the culture of their Kemetic ancestors. This is all part of one legacy, one people. This is another temple, not too far from the Temple of Karnak. This is the temple called the Temple of Luxor, built by a series of Kemetic kings. But what you see is the basic framework, the 2 pylons, the pair of tekenu. But what this symbol represents is the theft of African culture, the theft of African symbols. Because after the Arabs conquered Kemet in 640 ACE, they controlled everything within that land. And they gave it away, they sold it, they dismantled, they took the covering off the pyramid to build bridges and mosques. So that says something about their reverence for these sacred objects. It wasn't theirs. They didn't respect it. In 1881, Muhammad Ali, the Turkish ruler of Egypt at that time, gave this tekken that stood to the right of the entrance of the Temple of Luxor, gave it to his friend, King Louis Philippe, the King of France, who took it down, shipped it to France, and then about 5 or 6 years later, they erected it at the Place de la Concorde in Paris, France. This symbol, which is called a tekken, not an obelisk is a Greek name for this object. It's called a tekken. This is the oldest symbol of resurrection known to man. It is a symbol that represents the resurrection of Asar, the first king of Kemet. So let's be very clear. This object is a 6,000-year-old symbol which represents the resurrection of an African king named Asar. His story is the first story in the recorded history of humanity of a king who died and was resurrected 4,000 years before the resurrection of Jesus the Christ. His son was conceived by his mother when she was impregnated by the spirit of his deceased father. The first story in the recorded history of humanity of an immaculate conception. And his son, Asar, was born on December the 25th, 4,000 years before Jesus the Christ. So it's important for us to know our story so that we can better understand how our story has been interpreted by others. So here's a taken that's now at the Place de la Concorde in Paris, France. There's a taken on the banks of the Thames River in London, England. There's a taken in Istanbul, Turkey. There's a taken in New York City. All of these are African symbols stolen from the continent, which represent the resurrection of an African god by the name of Asar. And very few people in this country know this story. Of course, the largest taken in the world is in Washington, D.C. And it honors, if you all ever take my field trip, the Egypt on the Potomac field trip, which Reality Speaks is sponsoring on May the 25th, I think? May 25th. Get your tickets, take that field trip, and your lives will be transformed during that 3-hour field trip. You'll see things that you never knew existed, things that have been right in front of your face all of your life. You just didn't know that it was yours. So it's important for us to know our history so that we can reclaim the symbols associated with our history wherever we may find them. It's important for us to engage in acts of Sankofa because we must begin the process of going back and reclaiming that which was lost, that which was stolen, because this is the knowledge that we must use in order to save our souls. We've been here for over 500 years. We've been trying to fit in. We've been trying to do everything Master said we should do, and we are still being marginalized. We even took on the God that our former slave masters gave us. We prayed to that God, and we're still being marginalized. So if you keep doing the same thing and you're not getting any results, maybe it's time for you to do something else. And the key to begin to do something else is to make a mental declaration of independence and engage in an act of Sankofa, to go back to the source of culture and civilization, to go back to the source of spirituality, to go back to the source of religion, and internalize this knowledge through the consciousness of your ancestors, and you will empower yourself. Not like no one else's traditions have empowered you. That's the beauty, that's the marvel of going back. Now let's go look at National Geographic. What has National Geographic done for us? In 2005, National Geographic gave us this forensic reconstruction of the face of King Tut. Made him a Caucasian-looking replica of Boy George. Now we know what he looks like. We have his mask. We have paintings. We have sculptures. So why is it necessary to go back and recreate his image? Why? Because white folk and Arabs have continuously written us out of our own history. As Dr. John Henry Clark said over and over again, Europeans have colonized information and images of Africa, and they've used that to control us. So until we can reclaim our own images and our own knowledge, we will never be free. Never be free. If you don't believe me, ask the people in Louisiana after Katrina. They waited on the government, and while they were waiting, they called on the white man's God, and they died. They suffered. So how much proof do we need that it's time for us to begin to do something different? It's past time. National Geographic in September of 2005 did this special edition on Africa. Now, National Geographic is known worldwide for their photography. They've got some of the best photographers in the world. So why is it on this issue that was devoted to Africa, there's no picture? All they gave us was a tiny picture of Africa on a white background. And they said, Africa, whatever you thought, think again. What are they telling you? They're telling you that white folk have their eyes on Africa. And they are in position now, Europeans and the Chinese are in position right now to recolonize Africa. And they will have it within the next 25 years if we don't get our acts together. All right? So this is the February 2008 issue of National Geographic. I want to focus a little bit on aspects of this article, just a few elements. What you can do, what I advise you to do is to go to the library if you don't have a copy of this and read the article. Go to my website and you can pull up a copy of my response to that article so that you can understand how we continue to be miseducated, so that you can understand how we are constantly bombarded with lies, so that you can make a choice as to what you want to believe. See, that's the important thing is we always have choices. And the more you read, the more awareness you have of the choices that are available to you, the better choices you can make. So it's about availing yourself of all information that is accessible. So one of the quotes in the article that really got me, and to be honest with you, the article is a well-written article. It's a very well-written article. There were just 2 statements, 2 paragraphs that let me know where the writer was coming from. And these two paragraphs ruined the article for me. One paragraph, the author says, Robert Draper says, revisiting that golden age in the African desert does little to advance the case for Afrocentric Egyptologists. Now, why did he have to go there? All right? They felt a need to attack those African men and women who are reclaiming their history. So here comes the attack. Revisiting the golden age in the African desert does little to advance the case of Afrocentric Egyptologists who argue that all ancient Egyptians from King Tut to Cleopatra were black Africans. Well, if they knew anything about the African-centered approach to Kemetology instead of Egyptology, Europeans can have Cleopatra because she wasn't really ours. But Tutankhamun is ours, and the generations who preceded him are ours. And the evidence is there to substantiate that, but they refuse to acknowledge it. The other point that really let me know that I needed to respond, because too many of our folk would have picked up this article because it was February, Black History Month, and they thought it was National Geographic paying homage to us during Black History Month. If anything, they were insulting us. And if you don't know your history, you won't know when you're being insulted. So he said, the second paragraph says, Nubians sometimes intermarried with their Egyptian neighbors to the north. King Tut's own grandmother, the 18th dynasty Queen T, is claimed by some to be of Nubian heritage. Now, wait a minute. As I said earlier, there's no phenotypical difference. There's no physiological difference between the Nubians and the Kemites. They're the same people. So this statement is designed to mislead you. As a matter of fact, in the interview that you all heard, he made reference to the Egyptians and other white pharaohs. So he implies, even the title of the article is misleading, the black pharaohs, which implies that the other pharaohs were white. There were more black pharaohs, African pharaohs, than there were white ones. And the white ones only came on the scene after Kemet fell. After Kemet fell, after the Nubians finally lost power. Then the Persians came in, then the Greeks came in, then the Romans came in, and it was all over after that. They added nothing to the nation. They borrowed, stole from what had been built and established thousands of years earlier. They added nothing. So let's look at this issue about Queen T. Queen T is one of my favorite personalities. I refer to Queen T as, one of the things that I like to do is to give names to many of these comedic personalities, names that we can relate to. Queen T reminds me so much of Dr. Wilson. She's got this fierce expression on her face and this bona fide afro. You'll see another shot of her and you'll see what I mean. But he makes reference here to Queen T. They asked the question, did the powerful Queen T, King Tut's grandmother, have Nubian ancestry? This bust made of wood that has darkened with age has inspired claims that she did. Now, even when there's evidence they still want to deny the evidence. They say that this image of Queen T has darkened with age. So this is not really what she looked like. In 1990, February 1990, talk about this attack against African-centered scholarship, because anytime African people try to liberate themselves, free themselves from physical, mental, or spiritual bondage, your oppressor will tell you that you're crazy for trying to do so. It was a European psychologist in the 19th century who coined the phrase drapetomania to describe those Africans who escaped from slavery. He said that you have to be mentally insane to leave, to escape slavery. So they create all of these insane diseases to describe a people attempting to free themselves, doing what they have always done. Think about Jeremiah Wright. Jeremiah Wright is asserting his spiritual freedom by embracing the Bible, Africanizing it, and saying that we can use this as a tool of liberation. So they say, oh no, Jeremiah, you can't do that. So they're treating him worse than they treated Saddam Hussein. And he's only telling the truth. But the reality is, they have demonstrated over time that they cannot handle the truth. So when the African-centered scholars were under attack, late 80s, early 90s, the New York Times was doing an article, and they called up Asa Hilliard and asked his comments about the African-centered movement. And Asa said, listen, let's stop playing games. All you have to do is show images of African personalities. Forget Cleopatra. Show an image of Queen T. So the reporter showed an image of Queen T in the article. This image of Queen T with half her face knocked off. And then the caption beneath this sculpture said, sculpture believed to be the head of Queen T. Revisionist historians argue that she is descendant of black Africans. Given the opportunity to tell the truth, they proved themselves to be incapable of doing so. So we must be clear about this so that we know what to listen to and what not to listen to, what to believe and what not to believe. So let me show you Queen T. Here's a profile of Queen T. Here's half her face knocked off. This is a bust in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. Here's Queen T. Now, if they said the wood darkened with age, how do you explain this hair? This is an African woman. How do you explain these lips? How do you explain the nose, the cheekbones? That's an African person. But they're incapable of acknowledging the truth. Now, let me share with you some other distinctive aspects of this bust of Queen T that link her to the Cushites, her ancestors. Here's a painting from the cover of the National Geographic. The Cushite kings always wore the double uraeus crown. Always wore the double uraeus crown. Check out her earrings. What do you see here? The double uraeus. And you see these two holes right here? That's where two uraei were. Somebody removed them. So she, based on her jewelry, was acknowledging the home of her ancestors. So she's very clear who she is. If others can't identify that, that is their problem. And we have to have the judicious sense to know what not to believe. And we only know that by doing our research. Now, let me just deal with her family. This is one family from the 18th dynasty. This is her husband, Amenhotep III, an African, who some Europeans refer to as the Napoleon of ancient Egypt. Now, granted, he lived thousands of years before Napoleon. He was one of the greatest generals in the history of warfare. At the War College in Washington, D.C. on the Potomac, they study his strategies. Amenhotep III. This is his son, Amenhotep IV, who changed his name to Akhenaten. I call this brother Lionel Richie. If you ever see the statue of him in the Cairo Museum, he's got this long chin like Lionel Richie. He's an African, very clear about who he is. This is his, depending on whose version of history you read, this is either his brother or his son, Tutankhamun. But this is one African family. There were dozens of African families. So how dare they limit our presence in Kemet to the Kushite kingdom? We have to know our history so that we can defend our ancestors and protect their legacy. Zahi Hawass, this man, is the enemy of all African people. And I say that because he is the director of antiquities for all of Giza. Well, actually, it used to be all of Giza, but now all of Egypt. Everything in Egypt is under his command. The King Tut exhibit came to the States in 2005, was here for 2 years, and now it's in London, England. And the Sunday before the exhibit opened in London, England, Zahi Hawass, this Arab who claims that the Egyptians are his ancestors, decided that he was going to put the body of this African king on display for the general public. Now, do you think a good Arab or a good Muslim would put the body of Muhammad on display? So that's concrete proof that these are not his ancestors. He put the skull on display. All this does is give them an opportunity to charge some extra money to go into the tomb to see his face. Now, what's significant about this is that when Anwar Sadat, who by his own admission was the first true Kemetic king in over 2,000 years. Anwar Sadat's father was Arab, but his mother was Nubian. He was a dark-skinned brother. As a matter of fact, there was a film made of his life, and Lou Gossett played Anwar Sadat. Arab Egyptians hated Sadat because of his Nubian blood. So when Sadat was the president of Egypt, he said that this body, this mummy of Tutankhamun, his ancestor, used to be on display in the Cairo Museum. He said it is a disgrace for our ancestors to be depicted in this manner, and he was the one who had his body moved back to his tomb, put into his sarcophagus to honor his ancestors. Then comes Zahi Hawass to put his body on display, because to the Arabs, it's always about money. So they are pimping our ancestors. They are pimping our culture. We need to be very clear about that. I want to play for you a brief clip, an interview with Zahi Hawass, when he was asked about this issue of African people claiming Kemet as their own. So listen to this interview.
Of course, Sheikh Anta was completely wrong. This is a kind of a theory that he developed because of, it doesn't mean, look at the features of the people, the black. In Egypt today, their nose, their lips is completely different from the Negro. And therefore, Sheikh Anta theory, he did it, I think, in a time to please the black Americans who really feel their minority and they want to be connected with a civilization like Egypt.
Zahi Hawass, director of the pyramids, believes that Egyptians have a uniqueness that is neither African nor Mediterranean.
Look at other countries, Ethiopia and Uganda and Sudan. They have the Nile. Why this civilization did not occur in any place else except here? I really do not believe that Egypt is an African civilization. I believe that Egyptian civilization were unique. Egypt is in Africa, but the Egyptian civilization has nothing to do with the African cultures.
Now, I can't tell you how long it took the Arabs to acknowledge that Egypt is in Africa. So he finally admits that Egypt is in Africa, but Egypt has nothing to do with African people. All right? That's what happens when someone conquers your homeland. They run you out. And you know what? It's happening in Baltimore. Folk are coming into your homeland and running you out. It's happening in D.C. right now. It's happening in Chicago, my hometown. It's happening in Philadelphia. It already happened in Harlem. So they take over, and what was yours is now theirs. And because we didn't protect it, because we didn't hold on to it, somebody else is reaping all of the benefits. So one of the things that I do, I'm working on my new book now. One of the things that I'm doing is looking at architecture and looking at sculptures that tell the story of the theft of African history and culture. I want to just briefly show you some images at the U.S. Customs House in New York City on Wall Street. Sits right on the river. There are 4 sculptures in front of this building. And again, for those of you who come on our Egypt on the Potomac field trip, we do the same thing at the Library of Congress, where we show you, we break down our story, which is carved in stone right in front of your eyes. But if you don't know how to read what's there, you just walk by. I think it's an interesting building. There are 4 statues in front of this building. I want to focus on 3 of them. They represent 3 continents: Africa, Europe, and America. And you may not be able to see clearly, but I'll describe to you the images that's here. The first image is Africa. It is a female, it is a sister, breast exposed, with their hair in braids, sitting on a chair, a throne, if you will, which has the head of a lion on one side and the head of Heramakhet, the so-called Sphinx, on the other side. Behind her, on the side, is this figure with a cloak. Looks like he's hiding something, and he's holding something in his hand. Now, this sister who represents Africa is asleep. She is unconscious. The next image is Greece. This is Athena, the Greek goddess Athena. And on the side of her throne is that same figure who's now here in Greece, but that cloak is off. And he has a book that he stole from Kemet. The book symbolizes knowledge. So he stole the knowledge from Africa, and Africa is now asleep, dead. And that knowledge then came into Greece. So here Athena is sitting on her throne, and she's holding the book in her hand. She now has access to all of the knowledge of Africa, because that's what the Greeks did when they conquered Kemet in 332 BCE. And then we have America. Third figure is America. So here is America, and here's that same figure who's now here with the cloak all the way off. So America is the recipient of this knowledge and power. So my last book is called Egypt on the Potomac. And what I deal with in that book is the people who created Washington, D.C. literally, symbolically, spiritually, architecturally recreated the Nile River Valley in the Potomac River Valley. White folk, Europeans, took this knowledge to advance themselves. So they very freely would tell you, if you know what to look for, that everything they got that made them powerful, they got from Africa. So I submit to you, brothers and sisters, that if African knowledge is good enough for white folk, it should be good enough for us. We need to stop turning our backs on our mother, because that is what sustains us. So let me share with you a piece that I shared before, the last time I was here. It's a piece that speaks to the theft of African knowledge. We see it here symbolically, but I also want to show you that this theft is something that has been going on for a long time. It's a clip that is from the old Richard Pryor television show in 1979. Let me share this to you again. I got 2 pieces from Richard I'm going to share with you all tonight, because I want to build on what I shared the last time I was here. So here's part 1, and then later on in the presentation, I'm going to share with you part 2, and I'm going to put all of these pieces together so that you can understand very clearly what it means. So check out Richard.
Professor! I got it open! Good heavens, man! Great Scott, we've the fountain of all knowledge of Egypt in the entire world, do you realize the importance of this moment, Smedley?
Yes, sir, I do.
Do you see the brilliancy, the untold years?
I see it, sir.
This is medicine. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir. Slide. Look, what is this? Tea. Says, cannot. This is the elixir of life, sir. Elixir of life? The cure for all diseases. Wait, see here. Wait, give it to me. Inscription on the bottom. Give it to me. Give it. Open at other end. Mnemonics. This can't be, man. What? You know what this is? What is it, Buddha? It's the book of life. Book of life? In the beginning, when man arrived on Earth, the black gods did leave their spacecraft, and they walked, and they named the beast of the sea and the animals of the land. Heavens. And man in his blackness did walk the earth, making medicine. Medicine? They discovered type. These were all black people got down. Wait a minute. This ain't nothing here about whitey. This is ours. Wait till the brothers hear this. Funa. I'm gonna get this book out of here, baby. This tells me real tea. Funa, control yourself, don't you see? What you mean, Jack? Look at this here. Black people started the music and the brain surgery back in the year 3 BC. Yes, of course, Buddha. Man, they was getting down. This is it, brother. Yes, everybody gonna know about this. Listen, we can change the history. Civilization will be changed. Yeah, this is gonna be it. Get the bulldozers. There's nothing here. But. Shut up. Good heavens, time for tea, eh? What?
All right. This is a comedy skit, but there's truth in it. All right. What did Richard say? He found the book of life. The book of life that had our story in it. And what did he say? Wait till the brothers and sisters see this. It will change the course of history. Because if we knew who we were, we would stop acting like niggas, bitches, and hoes. And we would be who we really are. He said, I've got to get this book out of here. It would change the course of history. And white folks said, oh no, we can't have that because we make too much money off of your foolishness. So that's a metaphor for the life that we have lived. And we need to understand that so that we can change the way we live our lives, all right? So let me go into this next segment before we take a brief break so you can go to the restroom, get some water, and then we'll come back and finish this thing up. But I want to spend just a few minutes before we go to break to talk about these Kushite kings and why their work was so important. The Kushite kings established the 25th dynasty. They were responsible for restoring Kemet to its former greatness because Kemet had been ruled by over 100 years. Kemet had been ruled by Asiatics, by despots, and it was a mess. It was a mess. So Pianke, living down in what is now called Sudan, Pianke said, I must restore the land of my ancestors. So he waged a holy war. And he marshaled his forces. They stopped at Pet Sut, at the temple of Karnak. They bathed, they purified themselves in the waters there. They said their prayers to our men, and then they went out to restore their homeland. And they were victorious. And Pianke, true to his African spirit, decided that after he conquered these invaders, he said, I'm not going to kill you because that's not in my heart. That's not how we roll. Just get out of town and don't come back. And so he fortified the area, and then he went back home to live the rest of his life. But what happened? They came back. They came back. So his brother, Shabaka, said, all right, I ain't going to play this time. He came back and he wiped them out. Wiped them out and restored the temples. Brought stability to the land. And then went back home. But guess what? Just like roaches, they came back. So Taharka, the son of Pianke, came back with a vengeance, and he didn't spare anybody. He wiped them out. He learned from history. He learned that these people cannot be trusted. So he wiped them out, and then he restored all of the temples. And then he began to re-administer the sacred ceremonies that had been operated in Kemet for over 2,000 years. He brought Ma'at back to the motherland. This is what we did when we were in our right minds, when we knew who we were. But I want to spend a few minutes talking about Pianke's brother, Shabaka, because Shabaka did something phenomenal. He did something that no other king of Kemet had done. Shabaka decided that he was going to go back, he was going to engage in an act of Sankofa. He said that in order to restore stability, we've got to go back to the early dynasties. We've got to bring that knowledge and those teachings back so that our children can know this knowledge today so that our land will never fall again. And so he commissioned the writing of this document, which is now in the British Museum. It's been in the British Museum since it was donated to the British Museum in 1805. And it was there for 100 years before they realized what they had. And when they began to decipher the meta-nature on this document. Now, this is called the Shabaka stone. And it was unfortunate that when the Arabs conquered Kemet, they didn't know what this thing was because they couldn't read meta-nature. So they used it as a millstone to grind up grain. And it destroyed much of the meta-nature. But once they began, Wallace Budge and others began to decipher this document, they realized that they had in their possession the most significant spiritual text of all of Kemet. Shabaka had his scribe write this text on stone because the original documents had been weathered with age, were worm-eaten. And so they would no longer be available to future generations. So Shabaka said he commissioned his scribes to record this document on stone so that it would last forever, so that our people would never forget. And this document is known today as the Memphite theology. What it does is to talk about the beginning of mankind on earth. It talks about God creating the universe, creating earth, creating man, woman, and child, and every animal that inhabited the planet, and then established the rules by which we may live and be prosperous. This is the most intact spiritual text, the oldest intact spiritual text in the world. Powerful document, powerful document. And the essence of this text is that he dealt with something different when he talked about this. He went beyond just talking about Amen, or Atan, the God who brought the world into existence. He did something profound. He said that there was a God or a nature that preceded this God. There was a God who created the other gods, and he was Ptah, and he was the instrument through which the God of creation came into existence. God gave birth to the God of creation. That is deep. And the beautiful thing about what all of this expresses is that the Kemites and the Cushites made no distinction between body, mind, and spirit. They knew that the knowledge originates in the heart. In the heart, they understood something that we have forgotten, that consciousness is not in the brain. Consciousness is in the heart. That is the seat of the soul. That is why when a person was buried, their heart was buried inside of their body because the heart is the seat of the soul. That is why in the scenes of the weighing of the soul, your heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at on the scales of justice. The heart is the seat of the soul. So they understood very clearly that knowledge originates in the heart based on the perceptions that are reported to the heart. All of your senses, and you have more than 5 senses. I want you all to know that. All of your senses give feedback to the heart. And then the heart, all knowledge formed in the heart is then communicated by the tongue. So first, the heart speaks to the tongue, and then the tongue replicates what the heart has commissioned it to say. And then you speak from the heart, and then you write what you have spoken. So Ptah, or the heart, is the instrument through which everything comes into existence, and then Jehuti, or Thoth, is the scribe who records what's from the heart and then speaks it. So he records Medu Necher, and then he speaks Medu Nefer. Beautiful speech from the heart. This is who we are, sisters and brothers. So look, we're going to take a break. We're going to take, how long is the break? Well, I'll let Jabari deal with that. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back and finish this up. I've got some really good things to close this out. We probably have about 15, 20 minutes to close it out, but it's going to be some good information that you will love, and we'll be right back after this break.
Give it up for Brother Tony. If we could just hold for 1 second. Just a few announcements to make. We got a lot of things that's going on. Normally we come up here and we ask for donations. We're going to ask for donations today, but we're going to ask for donations. We're going to give you something for your donation. Like I said, Conscious Heads, Reality Speaks bookstore. We have a bookstore. We want you to support the bookstore as much as possible, but the donations that you give today, you're going to get something for those donations, right? What we normally tend to do, oh yeah, we got black dollars, y'all. Black faces on them. This right here is Harriet Tubman. This is Tubman City, right? Clap it up for Sister Harriet Tubman. And we got Sister Harriet Tubman on a $100 bill, right? So what we're going to do today is, we're going to ask for a $100 donation from anybody, but if you give a $100 donation, we're going to give you $120 worth of black dollars that you can spend at Reality Speaks bookstore. DVDs and CDs, or you can use it on our hair services that we have. So that's the first thing that we're going to do. So is there anybody today? Now, the thing is, if you're not going to use this for yourself, you can use it, give it to some people. You can split it up. Say, look, go get yourself a DVD or a CD, one of those different things. How many people today? Anybody here? You can get your tickets. Any tickets that we have, you can use your black dollars for tickets that we do for Reality Speaks. So is there anybody today? $100 donation, $120. Like I said, we got over 800 different topics at Reality Speaks bookstore. Anybody? $100 donation. We got the next thing that we have coming up. Y'all know about the tour that we have going to D.C. with Brother Tony Bowder, right? Field trip that we have going on. We got a 55-passenger bus. So you want to sign a list in the back so that we can call you because it's going to fill up real fast. We have another event coming up next Sunday, UNOI. Now, Reality Speaks Survivors Nation, we do events with everybody. So these brothers and sisters are building. They have gas stations, buses, restaurants, land, things all over this country. So we bringing them to town because we want to find out what they're doing because it's about nation building. After we get this knowledge and information, we got to do something with it, right? So we can't just sit and just come get knowledge and information. We got to do something with it. So anybody else before we go down to the next deal? Anybody else? Oh, we got a quiet crowd in here tonight. Sister, what's your name? I'm sorry. Denise. Sister Denise. Somebody give up the $120 package there. You can come to the shop and do it. Okay. Say your name one more time, sister. She been coming for years. Sister Alicia, give it a $120 packet. Sister Alicia right there. $120. Our money is also worth more than this European dollar that's going out of style, right? What's the dollar worth now? 46 cents. Good gracious. All right, anybody for the $50 packet? We fit? I'm sorry. No, she's going to go to the shop. She's going to go to the shop. She's going to charge you. Yeah. Anybody for the $50 packet? 50, you get 60. 50. Going once, going twice. Where we at? Sister Mona, give it up. Sister Mona, 50 for 60. Would it be anybody else? Then that next week coming up, y'all. Anybody familiar with Ray Hagan's? Credit card? Sister Eugenia? Oh, you talking about Ray Hagan's. I'm sorry. Anybody familiar with Ray Hagan's? Raise your hand. Ray Hagan's is one of the hottest lecturers on the scene right now. He's going around religion versus spirituality. We brought him earlier this year. We had about 300 people for Ray Hagan's. We got him coming out on the 26th. It's called America is Falling, right? So you want to get your tickets. We got tickets for Ray Hagan's. We're going to be busy, y'all. We're trying to get this information to our people. Our people dying out in the streets, but we got to change our minds first. We got to have revolution in our minds first, right? All right, this is the last packet I'm going to offer. $20 for 25. Now, everybody's hands should go up. Sister Tanya, the $25 packet. Anybody else? Brother in the back, what's your name? Earl. Brother Earl, give him the $25 packet. I seen another hand. Brother, what's your name again? Jay, how you like that tape the other day, bro? It was good? All right, give it up for him. Give him the $25 packet. Say your name one more time, bro. Brother Cole, y'all got to understand, look, when I get up here, I know people for years. I forget everybody's name when I get up here. Give it up for the brother. Give him a round of applause. Right, the brother. Right there. Oh, she want the $50 pack? Give her a round of applause. With the $25 packet? All right, give the brother a round of applause. Oh, we got over here Brother Hanif and Brother John. Give it up for Brother John. I know it's hot. It's like we home in here, right? For real? I know we spoiled by them air conditioners and everything, right? Oh, say it again. Oh, and you can also pick these up at the table also, these dollars. Would it be another? All right. Anybody? Oh, I'm sorry. Sister, can you hear me? Brothers, I know y'all hungry. I know you thirsty. We got dinners downstairs waiting for you. And if you, anybody else that have any other donations, you can. Oh, okay. It's a brother over at the table. Now, if you got $10 donation, we'll give you 2 Tubman dollars with Malcolm X, all right? But you can see the sisters over at the table. So you want to change your money up so that you can come on over to Reality Speaks bookstore, get some of these DVDs and CDs. Clap it up for yourselves. All right? You can purchase this DVD from the night, right? With your dollar, with your black dollars. Now, we got fish sandwiches and all. Go get your fish sandwiches. Come on up. We're going to go into part 2 and go into a heated question and answer session and get up out of here, right? All right, give yourselves a round of applause. I'm sorry.